The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Jane Peterson clung desperately to her horse, the stagecoach behind her already engulfed in flames. It was 1876 in the Arizona Territory, and what should have been a routine journey to Tucson had turned into a nightmare when a group of bandits ambushed their caravan. The last thing she remembered was her horse rearing up in terror before she was thrown violently to the ground, a searing pain shooting through her back before the world went black. 3 months later, Jane opened her eyes to the harsh morning light filtering through the window of Doc Miller's makeshift clinic in the small town of Redemption Creek. The pain had subsided, but so had all feeling below her waist. The doctor's words still haunted her. "The fall damaged your spine, Miss Peterson. I'm afraid you won't walk again." At 24, Jane had come west to start a new life as a schoolteacher. Now, lying motionless in a strange town, that dream seemed as distant as the eastern home she'd left behind. Her parents were gone, her meager savings dwindling with each passing day of medical care. The town council had been clear. They couldn't support an invalid indefinitely. They needed a teacher who could manage a classroom of rambunctious frontier children, not one confined to a wheelchair. "We've arranged passage back east next week," Mayor Thornton informed her that morning, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "There's an asylum in Pennsylvania that takes women in your condition. They've agreed to accept you." Jane felt her throat tighten. "An asylum." "But I'm not insane, I'm merely unable to walk." "It's a charitable institution, Miss Peterson. They'll provide for your needs." His tone left no room for argument. "The town has taken up a collection for your fare. It's the best we can do." After the mayor left, Jane stared at the ceiling, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. The thought of being shipped off to an institution thousands of miles away filled her with dread. She had heard stories about such places, warehouses for the unwanted, where people wasted away in neglect and despair. The clinic door swung open, startling Jane from her thoughts. Doc Miller entered, followed by a tall, broad-shouldered man Jane had never seen before. His face was tanned and weathered beneath the brim of a worn Stetson, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Miss Peterson, this is Blake Lawson," Doc Miller said. "He owns the Silver Creek Ranch outside of town." Blake removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. His eyes, sharp and blue as a mountain lake, assessed her with undisguised interest. "Madam," he said with a slight nod. "Mr. Lawson heard about your situation," Doc Miller continued. "He'd like to speak with you." Jane felt a flush of embarrassment. Word of her plight had clearly spread throughout the small community. She struggled to sit up straighter, smoothing her hair with shaking hands. "I'm afraid I'm not at my best for receiving visitors, Mr. Lawson." A hint of a smile touched the cowboy's lips. "I reckon none of us are at our best after what you've been through, Miss Peterson." Doc Miller excused himself, leaving Jane alone with the stranger. Blake pulled up a chair and sat beside her bed, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "I'll come straight to the point, Miss Peterson. I understand the town council has made arrangements to send you east." Jane swallowed hard. "Yes, to an asylum in Pennsylvania." Something flashed in Blake's eyes, anger perhaps. "That's not right. A woman shouldn't be locked away just because she can't walk." "I agree wholeheartedly, Mr. Lawson, but I have no family here, no means of support. The town has made its decision." Blake leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "What if there was another option? I need someone at my ranch, someone with education." Jane looked at him skeptically. "For what purpose?" "I have a younger sister, Emily. She's 15, bright as a new penny, but she's never had proper schooling. Our mother taught her basics before she passed, and I've done what I could, but—" He shrugged. "I'm no teacher. Emily deserves better." Jane's mind raced. "You're offering me employment." "As a tutor?" "Yes, madam. Room and board at the ranch, plus a fair wage. The house has wide doorways. We can make it work for your situation." Jane studied him, searching for pity or ulterior motives in his expression. She found neither, only a straightforward practicality that was somehow more comforting than any sympathy. "Why would you do this for a stranger, Mr. Lawson?" Blake was quiet for a moment. "My ma took sick when I was young, couldn't walk for the last years of her life. Pa built her a chair with wheels, carried her when she needed it. She still ran that household, taught us our letters, kept us all in line." His gaze met Jane's directly. "Being unable to walk doesn't make you unable to contribute, Miss Peterson." Jane felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Hope, perhaps. "And what does the town council think of this arrangement?" Blake's expression hardened slightly. "It's not their decision, it's yours. If you'd prefer to go east, I won't stand in your way. But if you want to stay in Arizona territory, I'm offering you a place. The council may not release the funds they've collected for my journey if I refuse to go. I'll cover any expenses," Blake said firmly. "No one should be forced to go where they don't want to." Jane weighed her options. An institution in the East where she would be nothing but a burden, or a chance to be useful again in this wild, beautiful territory she'd already come to love. What if it doesn't work out? What if your sister and I don't get along, or I'm not what you expected? Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, but I won't abandon you, Miss Peterson. You have my word on that." Jane took a deep breath. "When would I start?" The corner of Blake's mouth twitched upward. "How soon can you be ready to travel?" 3 days later, Jane found herself being carefully lifted into a modified buckboard wagon. Blake had added a padded bench with a backrest, secured so it wouldn't shift during the journey. His hands were gentle but firm as he positioned her, his manner respectful but without the awkward pity she'd grown accustomed to from others. "Comfortable?" he asked, tucking a blanket around her legs though the spring day was warm. "Yes, thank you." Jane felt simultaneously vulnerable and strangely secure. It had been months since anyone had touched her with such casual confidence, as if her paralysis was simply a fact to be accommodated rather than a tragedy to be mourned. Doc Miller handed Blake a small satchel of medicines. "For pain if she needs it," he explained. "And remember to help her change positions regularly during the trip." Blake nodded, his expression serious. "I'll take good care of her, Doc." Mayor Thornton arrived as they were preparing to depart, his face pinched with disapproval. "This is highly irregular, Lawson. The town has already made arrangements which are no longer necessary," Blake interrupted, his tone polite but unyielding. "Miss Peterson has accepted a position at Silver Creek Ranch." "As what? A burden on your charity?" The mayor's voice dripped with skepticism. Blake's jaw tightened. "As my sister's teacher, and that's all the explanation you're entitled to, Thornton," Jane spoke up, her voice steadier than she felt. "I appreciate the town's concern, Mayor, but Mr. Lawson has offered me an opportunity to be useful again. I've accepted his offer of my own free will." The mayor looked from Jane to Blake, then back again. "On your head be it then," he said finally. "Don't come looking to the town for help when this ill-considered arrangement inevitably fails." Blake climbed onto the wagon seat. "We won't," he said simply, and with a flick of the reins, they were moving away from Redemption Creek, the curious stares of townspeople following their departure. As the town receded behind them, Jane released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Blake glanced at her. "For what?" "For giving me a choice. For treating me like a person capable of making decisions." He nodded once, his eyes returning to the trail ahead. "Everyone deserves that much, Miss Peterson." The journey to Silver Creek Ranch took most of the day. Blake was attentive without being hovering, stopping regularly to help Jane shift position and offering water whenever they paused. They talked intermittently about the landscape, about Emily and her education, about Jane's background in teaching. Blake spoke little of himself, but Jane gathered he'd been running the ranch alone since his father's death 3 years earlier. "It's not much compared to some spreads," he told her as they approached a wide valley in the late afternoon. "About 1,000 acres, 200 head of cattle, enough to make a decent living if the weather cooperates and the rustlers don't." Jane saw the ranch come into view, a sturdy 2-story house built of timber and local stone. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands Blake employed. It wasn't grand, but it looked solid and well-maintained, a testament to its owner's character. A slender girl with long brown braids came running from the house as they pulled up, her face alight with curiosity. "Blake, is this her? Is this my teacher?" Blake set the brake and jumped down from the wagon. "Emily, mind your manners, this is Miss Peterson. Miss Peterson, my sister Emily." Emily approached the wagon, her eyes wide. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Miss Peterson. Blake says you're going to teach me all sorts of things, history and literature, and even some Latin if you know it." Jane couldn't help smiling at the girl's enthusiasm. "I do know some Latin, and I'd be happy to teach you, but we'll start with assessing what you already know." "I've read every book in the house at least twice," Emily declared proudly. "Even Pa's old medical texts, though Blake says some parts aren't suitable for young ladies." Blake cleared his throat. "Let's get Miss Peterson settled before you overwhelm her with your endless questions, Em." He turned to Jane. "Ready to see your new home?" The word home caught Jane by surprise. It had been so long since she'd had a place that felt like one. She nodded, and Blake lifted her from the wagon with the same careful strength he'd shown earlier. Being held against his chest, Jane was acutely aware of his physical presence, the steady beat of his heart, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. As promised, the doorways in the house were wide enough to accommodate the wheelchair Blake had somehow procured. Her room was on the ground floor, simply but comfortably furnished, with large windows overlooking a small garden. Mrs. Harding comes in 3 times a week to help with cooking and cleaning, Blake explained as he set Jane gently on the bed. "She'll be here tomorrow. Until then, Emily and I will help with whatever you need." "I can manage more than you might think," Jane said. "I've had 3 months to adapt to my circumstances," Blake nodded. "I don't doubt it, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." That evening, Jane joined Blake and Emily for dinner in the kitchen. Emily chattered excitedly about her hopes for their lessons, while Blake quietly ensured Jane had everything she needed without making a fuss about her limitations. It was the most normal Jane had felt since the accident. Later, as Blake helped her prepare for bed, Jane found herself fighting unexpected tears. "Is something wrong?" he asked, concern furrowing his brow. "Are you in pain?" Jane shook her head. "No, it's just... This morning I thought I was bound for an asylum with no future to speak of. And now I'm here with a purpose again. It doesn't seem real." Blake's expression softened. "It's real enough, Miss Peterson, and you're welcome here for as long as you want to stay." As he turned to leave, Jane called after him. "Mr. Lawson, may I ask why you really brought me here?" "There must be other teachers who aren't." She gestured helplessly at her useless legs. Blake paused in the doorway. "When I saw you in that clinic, with everyone treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person who needed a chance, it reminded me of my mother. She was the strongest person I ever knew, but people only saw what she couldn't do, not all the things she could." He met Jane's gaze steadily. "You deserved better than what they were offering you." With that, he bid her good night, leaving Jane to contemplate this unexpected turn in her life's path. The next few weeks established a routine at Silver Creek Ranch. Mornings were dedicated to Emily's lessons, which Jane discovered she enjoyed tremendously. The girl was indeed bright and eager to learn, soaking up knowledge with an enthusiasm that reminded Jane why she'd wanted to become a teacher in the first place. Afternoons found Jane adapting to her new role in the household. She took over the accounts and correspondence for the ranch, tasks Blake admitted he'd neglected due to lack of time and inclination. Her neat handwriting and education proved valuable as she organized the chaotic records and began corresponding with cattle buyers and suppliers. Mrs. Harding, a widow from a neighboring ranch, came regularly to help with the heavier household tasks, but Jane insisted on contributing what she could. Blake had built a table of the right height for her wheelchair in the kitchen, allowing her to prepare vegetables and knead bread dough. Small adaptations throughout the house gradually made it more accessible. each one implemented without fanfare by Blake or one of his ranch hands. Jane found herself watching Blake when he didn't notice. There was something compelling about the quiet competence with which he ran the ranch, the respect his men showed him, the gentle patience he displayed with his sister. He worked from dawn until dusk, his physical strength evident in everything he did, yet he was never too busy to pause and assist Jane if she needed help. One evening in late May, Jane was sitting on the porch enjoying the cool air after a blazing hot day when Blake joined her, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. "Emily's making good progress," he remarked, handing her a glass. "She told me today she wants to attend that women's college in California someday." Jane smiled. "She certainly has the intellect for it. You should be proud of her." "I am." Blake settled into a chair beside her. "And grateful to you. She's happier than I've seen her in years." "It's my pleasure." "Teaching her has reminded me how much I love education." Jane hesitated. "But I've been wondering what happens when she doesn't need me anymore, when she's learned all I can teach her." Blake looked at her, surprise evident in his expression. "You're welcome here regardless, Jane. This isn't just employment, it's your home now if you want it to be." It was the first time he'd called her by her given name, and something about the way he said it made her heart beat faster. "You've done so much for me already," she said softly. "I don't want to be a burden." Blake's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "You're not a burden. You're an asset to this ranch, to all of us. The books haven't been this organized since my mother was alive, and those letters you wrote to the cattle broker in Tucson got us a better price than I've ever managed." He paused. "And beyond all that, having you here has brought something back to this house that's been missing for too long." "What's that?" Jane asked, hardly daring to breathe. "Life, conversation, someone who sees the world differently than I do." His thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. "I've spent 3 years focused on nothing but keeping this ranch going and raising Emily. I'd forgotten there was more to living than just surviving." The sincerity in his voice made Jane's throat tighten with emotion. "I thought my life was over when I lost the use of my legs. That no one would ever see me as whole again." "I see you, Jane," Blake said simply. "All of you." The moment hung between them, fragile and precious, until the sound of Emily calling from inside broke the spell. Blake released Jane's hand and stood, a slight flush visible on his tanned face. "We should head in," he said. "Looks like a storm's coming." Indeed, dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, but Jane sensed the weather wasn't the only thing changing at Silver Creek Ranch. As spring turned to summer, Jane became increasingly integrated into ranch life. Blake modified a saddle so she could occasionally ride with him to check on the herd, her body secured against his arms around her waist to hold the reins. These excursions, ostensibly to give her fresh air and a change of scenery, became the highlights of Jane's weeks. On one such ride in late June, they stopped by a small creek for lunch. Blake spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree and carefully transferred Jane from the horse to the ground. He'd become adept at moving her, always respectful of her dignity while ensuring her comfort. "It's beautiful here," Jane said, looking around at the wildflowers dotting the grassland and the distant mountains shimmering in the heat. "This was my favorite spot as a boy," Blake admitted, unpacking the lunch Mrs. Harding had prepared. "I'd come fishing here when chores were done. Sometimes just to think." "What did you think about?" Jane accepted the sandwich he offered. Blake shrugged. "The future mostly, what I wanted from life." He looked at her. "What about you? What did you dream of before coming west?" Jane considered the question. "I wanted to make a difference. My parents were both teachers. They believed education could change lives, open doors. I thought if I could bring that to children on the frontier." She trailed off, then smiled ruefully. "Life had other plans, it seems." "You're still teaching," Blake pointed out. "And making a difference to Emily and to me. It's not quite the same as running a schoolhouse." "No," Blake agreed, "but sometimes the path we end up on is better than the one we planned." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the burble of the creek and the songs of meadowlarks. Jane found herself studying Blake's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "Blake," she said suddenly, surprising herself with her boldness, "may I ask you something personal?" He turned to face her. "Of course." "Why aren't you married? She hesitated, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "You're not unattractive, you have a successful ranch, you're kind." Surely there must have been opportunities. Blake chuckled at her awkward compliment. "There were a few interested parties after I inherited the ranch," he admitted, "but they seemed more enamored with the property than with me." He plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between his fingers. "And then I was so busy raising Emily, keeping things running. It didn't seem like the right time." "And now?" Jane asked, her heart beating a rapid tattoo against her ribs. Blake's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. "Now I'm beginning to think I was waiting for someone worth changing my life for." The moment was interrupted by a distant rumble of thunder. Blake glanced at the sky, where clouds were gathering with unexpected speed. "We should head back," he said, quickly packing up their picnic. "Storms move fast out here." They barely made it halfway to the ranch before the skies opened. Rain fell in sheets, soaking them within seconds. Blake spurred the horse to a faster pace, one arm tightening protectively around Jane as they rode. By the time they reached the ranch, they were both drenched to the skin. Blake carried Jane directly to her room, calling for Emily to bring towels and dry clothes. "I'm so sorry," he said, setting Jane on the edge of her bed. "I should have checked the weather more carefully before taking you out." Jane laughed, pushing wet hair from her face. "It's only water, Blake. I'm not made of sugar, I won't melt." Their eyes met, and something in his expression changed. Without warning, Blake leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, tender kiss that ended almost before Jane realized what was happening. He pulled back, looking as surprised by his action as she felt. Forgive me, I shouldn't have." Jane reached up, placing her fingers against his lips to silence him. "Yes, you should have," she whispered, "and you should again." This time when he kissed her, it was deliberate and unhurried. His hand cradled her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone as his lips moved against hers with growing confidence. Jane felt something unfurl inside her, a warmth, a certainty that had been building since the day he'd appeared in Doc Miller's clinic and offered her a future. Emily's voice in the hallway broke them apart. Blake straightened just as his sister entered with an armful of towels, his face flushed in a way that had nothing to do with their ride through the rain. "You're both soaked," Emily exclaimed. "I'll make hot tea while you change." As Blake backed toward the door, his eyes never left Jane's. "We'll talk later," he promised softly. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Blake and Jane sat before the fire in the parlor. For the first time since they'd met, there was an awkwardness between them, neither quite knowing how to bridge the gap from friendship to something more. Finally, Blake cleared his throat. "About what happened earlier, did you mean it?" Jane interrupted. "The kiss, was it impulse, or—" "It wasn't impulse," Blake said quietly, "though I'd planned to be more eloquent about expressing my feelings." He moved from his chair to kneel beside her wheelchair. "Jane, these past months with you here, you've brought life and light back to this house, back to me. I find myself thinking about you constantly, your smile, your determination, your kindness to Emily." Jane's heart soared at his words, but doubt still nagged at her. "Blake, I can't pretend my condition doesn't matter. I'll never walk again. I'll always need help with certain things." "Are you sure that's what you want? A woman who can't be a proper wife?" Blake's expression hardened. "Don't say that. There's nothing improper about you." He took her hands in his. "Do you think I care that you can't walk? It's your mind that fascinates me, your spirit that inspires me, your heart that I've fallen in love with." "Love," Jane echoed, scarcely believing what she'd heard. "Yes, love," Blake affirmed. "I love you, Jane Peterson. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." Tears filled Jane's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "But the world won't make it easy for us. People will talk, say cruel things." "Let them talk," Blake said firmly. What do we care for the opinions of people who can't see past your wheelchair to the extraordinary woman sitting in it? He stroked her cheek gently. When I look at you, I don't see limitations, I see possibilities. Jane leaned into his touch. I never thought I'd find love after the accident. I thought that part of my life was over. It's just beginning, Blake promised, and sealed his words with a kiss that left no room for doubt. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the surrounding ranches and into Redemption Creek. Reactions were mixed. Some offered genuine congratulations, while others whispered behind their hands about Blake saddling himself with a cripple, and speculated on his motives. Mayor Thornton was particularly vocal in his disapproval when Blake and Jane visited town to order supplies. Lawson, I understood taking her in as an act of charity, but marriage. Have you considered the practical implications, the burden you're assuming? Blake's jaw tightened dangerously. The only burden I see, Thornton, is listening to you insult my fiancée. Jane is the woman I love and respect above all others. She's not a charity case. She's my pride, my joy, and soon to be my wife. The mayor blustered, but Blake had already turned away, guiding Jane's wheelchair toward the general store where a beaming Emily waited for them. Later that night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Jane squeezed Blake's hand. Thank you for defending me today. Blake brought her fingers to his lips. I'll always defend you, though you do a fine job of it yourself most times. He smiled. Did you see Thornton's face when you corrected his arithmetic on that invoice? I thought he might swallow his tongue. Jane laughed. Knowledge is one advantage that can't be taken away by physical limitations. You have many advantages, Jane Peterson, soon to be Lawson, Blake said softly. And I'm the fortunate man who gets to spend his life discovering them all. They were married in July, in a simple ceremony on the ranch. Emily served as maid of honor, beaming with approval as her brother and beloved teacher exchanged vows beneath an arch of wildflowers. Doc Miller came from town, along with several neighboring ranchers and their families. Even Mrs. Harding shed a few tears as Blake promised to love and cherish Jane for all their days. That night, as Blake carried his bride across the threshold of their bedroom, a needless but cherished tradition, Jane felt a completeness she'd never expected to find again after her accident. Blake's tenderness as he helped her prepare for bed, his patience as they discovered each other as husband and wife, his whispered words of love and admiration all confirmed what she'd come to believe. That her worth was not diminished by her paralysis, that she was whole and wanted and loved exactly as she was. 1 year later, Jane sat on the porch of Silver Creek Ranch, a small bundle cradled in her arms. Their son, Thomas William Lawson, born just 2 weeks earlier, slept peacefully against her chest, unaware of the journey that had brought his parents together. Blake emerged from the barn, his face lighting up at the sight of his wife and child. He crossed to them in long strides, bending to kiss Jane's forehead and peek at their sleeping son. "How are my two favorite people today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Jane's wheelchair. "Perfect," Jane replied, leaning her head against his shoulder as he wrapped an arm around her. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year and a half, from believing my life was over to finding it had only just begun." Blake's arm tightened around her. "I thank God every day that I walked into Doc Miller's clinic that morning." "As do I," Jane said softly. "You saved me, Blake." He shook his head. "No, Jane, we saved each other." As the sun dipped toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Blake and Jane Lawson sat contentedly on their porch, their sleeping son between them, a family bound by love that saw beyond limitations to the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. In a world that had once deemed her unwanted, Jane had found not only acceptance but celebration of her worth. And in a man who had proclaimed her his pride, she had found a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives together.